We'll attempt to further explore the implications of the exit of Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso from ECOWAS in terms of trade. Writing for the Daily Trend, Dakwo Olawuni submits that the abrupt pullout of Niger, Mali and Burkina Faso from the Economic Community of West African States has fragmented the region's blocs, which is the bedrock of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, AfCFTA. The submission by maritime stakeholders is that a fragmented economy will negatively affect the agreement, which relies on regional blocs to aid the movement of goods and services across the continent without restrictions. We've had conversations here previously on where we are in terms of implementation of the AfCFTA. While there is more ways to go, how much of a setback will this exit be? My guest is Bamidele Ayemibo, lead consultant, 3T Impact Consulting, Lagos, Nigeria. It's good to have you on the program. Let's begin by just getting, is there something we might have missed? Has there been any development that may just nullify this conversation on the likelihood that these three will come back to the ECOWAS?
No news to that effect yet. It's obvious the reason why they want to pull out. They are not practicing democracy, and West Africa is on their case to return back to democracy, and it doesn't appear it's something that will happen anytime soon. They believe the kind of government they need to be able to make their country better. It's a sovereign nation, so they can take their decision, but the pressure is still much from ECOWAS, and they think pulling out will make them to be able to do whatever they want to do independently. So I don't see anything changing anytime soon. Let's hope for the best.
While we are hoping for the best, what are the possible implication or impact of the exit of this group from ECOWAS on the trade agreement?
This is definitely a setback for AfCFTA, no doubt, and even ETLS in West Africa. Combined, these three countries combined have a population of about 70 million people. That's a loss of 70 million market to AfCFTA, 70 million, and GDP of about $80 billion. So even though in terms of GDP, it's not a very large GDP, compared to that country in Africa, but in terms of population and purchase as market for AfCFTA and ETLS, it is a significant one that is a loss to West Africa and, of course, to AfCFTA eventually. But the way it appears, it doesn't appear it's going to be an issue for AfCFTA because they are not pulling out of African Union and the agreement they have, which is the AfCFTA agreement. They are pulling out of ECOWAS and the ETLS, which is under ECOWAS. So I'm not sure yet if it's going to really impact AfCFTA. I think we're going to feel more impact in West Africa. I'm not sure they are pulling out of AU. I think it's ECOWAS alone they are pulling out of.
Okay, but what is the difference really? ECOWAS is the Economic Community of West African States, and then AU is just African Union. Yes, it's a union that unifies the whole of Africa, but then again, you have the economic aspect, and that's the core when we talk about the AfTF. So could you help us explain that when you say they are not leaving the AU? The fact that they're leaving ECOWAS.
We have two agreements here. We have an agreement
under
ECOWAS, the ECOWAS Trade Liberalization Scheme under the Economic Community of West African States. Then we have the African Continental Free Trade Agreement that encompasses the whole of Africa, of which Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger are both signed and ratified. They are pulling out from ECOWAS does not automatically mean they are pulling out from the agreement they've signed and ratified under the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. So I don't see this impacting on the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. In terms of implementation, I see it impacting more on the ETLS under the ECOWAS. That's the ECOWAS Trade Liberalization Scheme.
But doesn't the fact that they don't operate a democracy impact their holistic involvement in the AU? The AU is supposed to champion democracy, right? And these countries don't practice democracy. So wouldn't their relationship with the AU be as strained as it is with ECOWAS?
Yes, it is, but it's now affecting the trading agreement, because the trading agreement is a different agreement altogether signed under AFCFTA. For example, we see have one or two countries that are yet to sign. I think Eritrea is yet to sign. Benin Republic, I'm not sure, have ratified. So, and they are still member of AU. The fact that they've not signed the AFCFTA does not mean they are not member of AU. So I can be a member of African Union, but I don't want to trade under AFCFTA. And I can be trading under AFCFTA and still be a member of African Union. So the fact that I'm under the geography of within the geographical region of Africa under AU does not necessarily mean I have to sign to trade with you duty-free. And the fact that I'm under AU means I can also decide to go ahead and sign. So there are two different agreements altogether and should not be mixed together.
Okay, I think that clarification was needed, even though I'm still fuzzy around it. But let's see if we can look at other areas. What then are the potential consequences of these countries' departure and the overall trade integration efforts in Africa? But before you answer that question, I'd like you to, where are we with the implementation of the free trade agreement? Are we, for instance, if we want to be very optimistic, say we're about 50% integration, or we're still way below that? You take that on before you take the next.
Let me use the word, there is a tariff schedule agreement that needed to be finalized, and it's over 90% complete at the level of AU. That's AFCFTA Secretariat confirmed this. Now, but in terms of, I would rather talk about, okay, let me talk also about trading under the agreement. The agreement, trading under the agreement have started with the guided trade initiative that started 2021, 2022, but Nigeria has not started trading, even though, in fact, I saw a news, was it early this week or last week, that South Africa has started trading. A number of other countries like Ghana, like Kenya already started trading, but Nigeria is yet to trade. But in terms of readiness to trade, the fact is that Africa is ready to trade. Trading has started. In terms of the tariff schedule concession, about 90% already agreed. And for me, the agreement is effectively in place, even though many African countries have not started trading, including Nigeria being among the people that have not started trading under AFCFTA.
Okay, so the part about the integration, the consequences for the integration efforts in Africa, how will this impact it? Because we've made some, you said we've made some progress, but stakeholders are afraid, like I mentioned at the beginning of the program, that it will impact. So what are some of the things we should expect as a consequence of this move?
So I will look at it from West Africa now, because they are pulling out of ECOWAS, which is ECOWAS Trade Liberalization Scheme, ETLS. So that will be impacted definitely. So we expect, of course, a reduction in the market for ECOWAS. About 70 million market is being excluded. ECOWAS population is about 350 to 400 million people, and about 70 million is being pulled out as a result of this agreement. We are losing about 12 billion potential market demand. So if when you look at the import volume of Burkina Faso, about $4.5 billion, that of Mali, about $4.56 billion, that of Niger, about $2.3 billion. This is the demand, import demand. So if we are looking at export from West Africa to this country, we are losing out on that huge market of about $12 billion, even though majority of their import is actually from outside Africa. So for example, Burkina Faso is importing about 30% of Burkina Faso imported from ECOWAS. About 30% also of Mali is from ECOWAS, and 30% of Burkina Faso import also is from ECOWAS. But when you look at Niger, about 25% of import of Niger is from ECOWAS. So when you look at the 30%, 25%, that's a lot of import they are doing from ECOWAS. I see that being a major loss as a result of this. Now, when you look at the map of these three countries are landlocked. But there are some countries after them that if I'm going to Libya, if I'm going to Algeria, if I'm going to Mauritania, if I'm going to Morocco, if I'm going to Senegal, passing through this country under the ETLS make it a lot easier for me to get to those countries by road. With this now, of course, the barrier is expected to return. That means I might not be able to pass through this country duty-free. I might have to pass through the West African coast if I'm going by road, and that'll be a longer journey for me. Those are some of the impact I foresee happening within this impact. I mean, as a result of them pulling out of ECOWAS, and of course the impact on the agreement and trade on the West African sub-region.
I'm curious, though. We're talking about the impact of their withdrawal from the bigger picture, like the larger scale, let's say ECOWAS, for instance. What about the countries themselves? How will this decision by their leaders to exit affect the citizens there in terms of trade as well?
You know, what that's interesting, because, and very important question, I must say, you know, their export, and, you know, because ab initio, intra-African trade is very low, 14, 15, 16, 17%. Different people will quote different figure, but nobody is quoting more than 17, 18%. So this country also is part of it. They are not doing a lot of trade with Africa. Take, for example, Burkina Faso export to Africa, which is mainly within ECOWAS, is just about 5%. 76% of the export of Burkina Faso is to Switzerland. When you go to Mali, Mali export to Africa is less than 1%. 78% of the Malian export is to UAE. Look at Niger. Niger export to Africa is just about 10%. 10%. Over about 70% of their export is to UAE. So I really don't see a lot of impact, maybe for informal trade and movement of person, but in terms of trade, in terms of export, I really, based on the data available, see a lot of impact on them. I guess they have looked at this also and asked themselves, look, in terms of trade, what are we really gaining from this relationship? I think these people are doing more trade with us than we are doing with them in terms of export. Maybe that's the reason they could take that kind of decision. Maybe, I mean, I'm just looking at the data and asking myself, maybe this explains the reason why. So I don't see, in terms of trade, I don't see a lot of impact on there because they are not really doing a lot of trade with Africa ab initio. They do a lot of commodity export, mainly doing gold, and they are doing it mainly to countries outside of Africa.
Interesting. There is this need to negotiate sometimes. How will their withdrawal affect ECOWAS' ability to negotiate trade agreements with other regional economic communities? Will it have much impact? Again, I go back to the conversation around them not being a democracy anymore. Does that play a role in trade interactions?
ECOWAS can go ahead and do its negotiation without them. They have left ECOWAS. They are leaving ECOWAS. ECOWAS still have, out of 15, 3 gone. So you still have about 12 countries within the ECOWAS. So it's really not stopping ECOWAS going ahead to do any negotiation as a trading bloc with whichever country or regions they want to negotiate with. So their withdrawal will not really affect ECOWAS. ECOWAS can move ahead. What I think ECOWAS should be doing is to see, okay, look, what can we do to bring them back into the bloc? Now, I mean, ECOWAS is interested in them going back to democracy. For me, this probably is a sign that they are not ready to go back to democracy anytime soon. Probably because they believe democracy is not suiting them and they're not planning to get democracy anytime soon. And they don't want to be under any pressure to do what they would not like to do anytime soon. So instead of having to negotiate and discuss, maybe that's what they pull out. But I don't think we should leave it up. I mean, ECOWAS should leave it just like that. I think there could still be some diplomacy going on, negotiation going on, okay, what do we need to begin to talk about, or conversation we need to begin to have for them to come back into ECOWAS rather than leaving.
We certainly hope that will be the case, but we know there are the issue is really Hydra-headed. The fact that they're not a democracy and they're not looking to do that quickly is a concern. What possible implications could this have for other countries within the ECOWAS that's considering a similar exit? Some might even be democracies.
I mean, a country that depends a lot on West Africa for trade, it won't be a good one for them to want to pull out. Like I said, I think it's easy for this country because they are asking themselves, these guys are shipping to us. They are taking a lot of opportunity from our market. We are not doing a lot of trade with them. So even if we pull out, we are still going to do business with the country we are currently shipping to. But any country thinking of this will not be a country that is doing a lot of trade within the economic bloc, because that will have a far-reaching implication and impact on them as a country. It will only be, any country thinking of this will be a country that feels, look, if we pull out, what are we even getting from this agreement in the first place? Are we even getting any benefit? Mainly countries that I think are making a lot of benefit from this agreement are Nigeria, Benin Republic, Togo, Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, and the like. Some other countries are probably not enjoying a lot of benefit from this trading bloc, and maybe they will probably thinking of that. I don't know if any of them is thinking of this, but I think in terms of trade, anybody that wants to pull out is going to ask itself a very important question. What is the implication of this on my GDP? Because I'm doing a lot of export to these countries.
Yeah, you're quite correct. What implications could this also be? I'm talking about the exit now. For other countries within the ECOWAS, the perception of ECOWAS as a reliable business, just as a reliable business initiative, if you want to have agreements, you know, trade partner, for instance, with other African regions. I don't know if I mangled that question. I don't know if you got it.
Yes, I get your question. It's of concern, no doubt. It's of concern, no doubt. Any trading bloc that is trying to deal with ECOWAS, maybe Asian, maybe NAFTA, NAFTA, which is now US, Canada, and Mexico, or EU, any trading bloc, this definitely will be of concern, because you are looking at about 15 countries together doing business with them. Now they are reduced to 12, and maybe the possibility of other people pulling out. Of course, it will be a concern to anybody that wants to do business with the bloc. But maybe what they would then consider is, I can do business with the bloc and probably consider the country. The challenge is this: as a unit, as a country, you really cannot do so much, to the extent that the population is very small. The GDP of the country is very small, per capita very small. So it really, unless the three of them want to come together to form a different trading bloc to be able to deal with whatever country they want to deal with, but it's really not wide for any country. I mean, this era of integration, era of globalization, it's really not wide for any country, particularly for countries that are small, particularly for countries that really need to do a lot of trade and need a lot of agreement to make that happen. It's not a good decision. And of course, this exit is definitely not painting ECOWAS in a good light.
All right, let's see if we can, I know we're talking trade, but I mean, a reconciliation wouldn't be a bad idea. What specific steps can be taken by ECOWAS to encourage this country to reconsider their decision to withdraw? Would that be something that you think is doable?
I think ECOWAS will reduce its stance on democracy, but rather a modified version of democracy that is good for Africa. There's a challenge with democracy in Africa. Democracy is good if it's practiced in the strictest sense of the word. Democracy is good for an environment where the majority are enlightened. But in an environment where the majority are impoverished and the vote is the same, one person, one vote, a person that is impoverished, that cannot think beyond a meal, and with a meal he will take a decision, will have the same vote as someone who will take a decision, right thinking mind, not based on what he will get, but based on what is best for the country. That is the shortcoming of democracy. I think Africa needs a version of democracy that works in Africa. So I think ECOWAS should reduce its stance on the fact that they must practice democracy the way we want it to be practiced. Rather, a version of democracy they believe is in their own best interest, not just what the West have given to us. So
the argument can be put.
Negotiation, but should not insist they have to practice democracy the way we want them to practice it.
I mean, the argument can also be put forward that it's not really about democracy or some pseudo or kind of democracy that we must practice. It's about leadership, the kind of leadership that we have in Africa. However you look at it, it's still the same people we're recycling. So even if you say we want to practice some kind of pseudo democracy, it's still from this pool of leadership that we're getting. So at the heart of everything we've discussed today, it still boils down to how would the leadership of ECOWAS take on the responsibility of trying to manage this crisis in such a way that it doesn't affect the region, trade and security-wise? I guess that's where we'll be leaving it. But before we go, your final thoughts on the subject of integration in Africa and how ECOWAS can better manage this crisis with the three countries so it doesn't impact the region negatively.
ECOWAS should not be silent when any of its members is not doing right. If there are agreements on what should be done, and a member of ECOWAS is erring as a country, even if the country will not listen to ECOWAS, ECOWAS will not keep quiet why that country is doing whatever it is it wants to do to its people. For example, maybe the people are callous to their people, they are doing things against democracy, even as a government who is in democracy. ECOWAS should not be silent, so that when issues like this happen, they know that ECOWAS has always been on the side of the people, not on the side of those in the government of that nation. And that will speak to the fact that ECOWAS might have to find a way also of funding itself in such a way that it can be independent-minded, not being unable to speak truth to power, particularly when a member of ECOWAS, that is a member funding the particular bloc, is erring and they are unable to speak to them on what they need to do right.
Bamindele, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you. Thank you for the insight you provided.
Thank you very much for having me.